Hello, everybody. Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. My name is Martin Loffers. I'm Chief Trend Watcher of Supply Chain Media. You may also know me as the architect of the IT subway map. I'm going to explain this afternoon. And I'm also the editor-in-chief of Supply Chain Movement, the quarterly magazine and the website and email newsletter. So welcome. We have an exciting hour talking about the digital transformation with supply chain software, a hot topic, I can imagine. So we have a 1 hour webinar, and afterwards we have a 30 minutes after talk, also in air meet. So I will explain later. So next, so as I said, that's me on the left, Martin Loffers, and on the right with me I have Peter Schram. Welcome, Peter.
Thanks for having me, Martijn.
Yes, I will explain later who you are. You have an interesting resume and an interesting background that will suit this webinar. Next, this webinar will be recorded. The PDF will be made available afterwards, so don't worry about that. Most common question in that sense. The audience is on mute, but please ask questions. You see on the upper right side, you see the chat function. You can use that. That would be nice, but better the Q&A questions, so you can ask questions along the way. So we will have a Q&A at the end. But please start asking these questions along the conversation I will be having with Peter. So why? Because if these questions are in line of the topics we are discussing, I will ask this question right away, so you don't have to wait your question to be answered at the Q&A at the end. You can enlarge your screen. You see four small arrows on the upper right part of your screen. You can enlarge your screen to look at the slides better. But feel free to join the conversation by asking questions. And if you have still questions at the end, at 5 o'clock CET, Peter and myself will be joining you in the lounge. So you can join us and have a direct conversation with Peter and me by clicking on table 1. We will be sitting at table 1. And a Zoom kind of meeting will open up, and you can have a direct conversation with Peter and me. All right, but first, before we go deep dive in digital transformation, Peter, can you tell me about yourself a bit?
Yeah, sure, Martijn. Thanks a lot. So, so if you look at my career, I think half my career more or less is in more industry roles. So I worked for DevTrucks, where I worked in factory logistics and in procurement. And besides that, I worked for Signify, so that's the former Philips Lighting, where I was the global program manager for S&OP. And the other half of my career, I've always been in consulting and research. So I worked for Accenture and IG&H consultancy. I worked for in that role for companies like ASML, PON, and a lot of work I did as well in container terminals for APM terminals. And then I also worked for Gartner as research director, where my focus area of my research was always on planning, so S&OP, demand and supply planning, but also more the transformational elements, like how do you build roadmaps, and also how do you do organizational design and performance management. And roughly a year ago, I started my own independent advisory, where I help organizations to basically improve their planning. And besides that, I'm also a startup advisor at Plug and Play. So that's in a nutshell my career and my background, Martijn.
A very versatile career, I would say, but it is very suitable for the topic at hand, digital transformation.
Yes.
So, can you tell me a bit more about how we talk about digital transformation later on? So, what is your opinion about the digital maturity of companies nowadays?
Yeah, so usually when I do this kind of meetings, as I also do them a lot face to face, I always ask people, so how digital mature are you? And kind of based on what I see on LinkedIn and based on what I see in a lot of, magazine, etc., I always expect that the maturity is very high. But most people I speak to that now they rate themselves like 1 or 2 on a 5-point scale, and that's also a bit in line with what I see in research. So I have here some data from Harvard Business Review where companies indicate that they only 28% of companies that they indicate that they're actually digitally mature.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not really a lot. And on top of that, I think that a lot of companies are still struggling to define actually what is digital maturity for them. Although they kind of have a big ambition. So a lot of companies indicate, and this number says that roughly 70% that they want to accelerate their supply chain modernization. But I see that a lot of companies are struggling actually to do that. So on your question, Martijn, I think when I look at the companies that I work with, that the gap between what is digitally possible and where companies are is quite large. So there's a lot of things still to do. And I see that a lot of companies are still quite struggling to put in a good roadmap in place to make that happen.
Yeah,
So,
and what? Yeah, and it totally makes sense. And when I talk to companies, I talk to a lot of supply chain executives, also supply chain directors. So I think that this gap is even getting larger. Why? Because because of the war in the Ukraine, the whole world is in a turmoil. So the supply chain is in the middle of a perfect storm. And then resiliency is on top of that. So this 68% is even getting higher, and up to 80 or 90%. All companies are aware that they should do something. And we talk about how is your resiliency related to your digital maturity. It's even lower. So how do you know you have early warning signs? So you have software like risk methods. To what extent are you using this early warning signs and digitally enabled warning signs? And this percentage of maturity is even getting lower. So that's my take on this. When you took, talking about the world and what's going on, what kind of mega shifts do you see impacting the supply chain?
Yeah, so kind of I totally agree on what you were just mentioning, Martijn. So I think that the reason why you should work on digital transformation is getting bigger and bigger. So I think that's totally recognized.
Hmm.
And I think there's in principle three reasons for that. So one is just kind of technology development. So technology is enabling you to do a lot of things more.
Hmm.
You have all these fancy terms like lights out planning. You can use IoT for the connected supply chain. You can use blockchain for traceability and visibility. So there's a lot of more options that you can actually leverage when you use technology. But why we should use that is that actually there's a lot of triggers that you mentioned, like resilience, that asks you to make that change. So I made this slide, I think, roughly 2 years ago, when we were talking about sustainability and globalization, and that seems to be a very thing that was something for the future. But now, 2 years later, I think that all of the things that we are seeing in terms of those megaships actually now happening. So,
Hmm.
for example, if you look at resource scarcity, with the whole ban, for example, on oil buying from Russia, issues with water, much more ESG regulation, but also all of the things that are happening in the world, in COVID and post-COVID, in terms of wars and things on, different power balances, that leads to a lot of pressure on the supply chain.
Hmm.
So I think in general we see that there's a lack of resources, there's changing demand patterns. So there's a lot of things going on at the moment that ask you to become more resilient, as you were mentioning, and where technology can actually help you.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
yeah, and when globalization, so we have done a major survey and a global survey together with Buck Consultants International, and as among 150 manufacturing companies in the US and Europe, and basically more 60% of these companies will are planning to do some strategic reshoring to either to US or Mexico or Europe or nearshore in Turkey, Morocco, and Tunisia. And does it mean the end of globalization? No. But to a strategic part, they will look at their tier one and tier two on a strategic sense that they want to have options. So dual sourcing, close by. So that will change their supply chain dramatically. Uh, Still, it isn't the end of globalization, but it will change, and that's something you cannot see on the statistics from last year, but it's looking back when you look at the economic figures. But when we'll look at our own figures among supply chain executives within manufacturing companies, we do see a tendency to reshoring. And I already have talks about major manufacturing companies who actually are doing scenario planning, some strategic assessments, how to reshore closer by to the home market or the market to serve. So that's something we see changing. So, and it's interesting to see that you mentioning the slides from 2 years ago, and now it's accelerating and also shifting a bit.
Yes, exactly. Yes. So there's a big need to change, and I think that, and we also discussed in our pre-talk, so that a lot of companies are looking at what they should be doing to address this, and because it has become much more complex, where I think pre-COVID the world was much more stable. All the
Yep.
things that we are now seeing in the technology developments, the requirement for sustainability, and kind of not, I'm not saying that the world is becoming more globalized, but all these global trends,
Yep.
there's a lot of things as a supply chain executive that you have to take into account. And that's kind of the key driver on why you need to change.
Yeah. And now, we also talk about supply chain software and technology. Maybe you can mention a bit, how to look at the technology. You have been working for Gartner, and we know these hype cycles, and maybe you can explain more. What is the sense of all this?
Yeah, so it's a good question. Kind of the things that you see here on the slide are kind of coming from the technology department in Gartner, and I work much more on the process side.
Mm-hmm.
It's really important to kind of think about these kind of things. And I think that the challenge of technology is that it's going so fast that we hardly cannot comprehend it anymore. So how you should use these kind of things is to kind of educate yourself to what's out there, and to kind of start to understand on how you could use these technologies in your own benefit, I would say. So these kind of things, and these are the hype cycles, but there's much more out there where you can learn about evolving technologies. In my perception, so you should use that to kind of learn a bit what's going on and to prepare yourself what's coming at you.
Yeah.
Does that make sense, Martijn?
Oh, absolutely. And when I look at this slide, on the left-hand side, you see the hype cycle for emerging technologies, kind of brand new, kind of quantum ML, that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of coming up, moving up in the hill, up to the peak of inflated expectations, and then to the right, you don't see any applications working yet. But
Yeah,
that's about emerging technology. It's kind of new. On the right hand side, that's supply chain planning technology, also well known. All kind of topics I've been writing about and discussing about in the last decade, I would say. Quite interesting. On the right hand side, you see the slope of enlightenment and the plateau of productivity. That means it's working. On the right hand side, you see S&OP, it's getting there, and uh, sales and operations planning starting to work and be effective. And curious thing, you see RPA on 2019. It was on the top of the hill of the hype, I would say,
yeah,
robotic process automation. But I already saw then that Heineken and Friese Campina, for example, were already using RPA. So these dots are averages of Gartner analysts, and so it doesn't mean it's not like real statistic. It's over there for some companies like Friese Campina and Heineken. RPA is already on the plateau of productivity. But the other
yeah,
thing is, what I'm seeing right now is that there's so much there. Look on the right hand side. What makes sense for your business strategy, and what makes sense for your supply chain strategy, and we will get that later on. So some dots you should ignore because it doesn't bring value to your business strategy, and that's something I would stress when I look at this. But it's good to see there's so much going on, and yeah, these are all sometimes helpful solutions, but sometimes shiny objects you should ignore. So that's something we should be aware of.
yeah.
Getting to the digital transformation, how do you measure the actual performance of this kind of transformation?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think kind of I created this slide, which is not only about digital transformation, but I think digital transformation is a part of that.
Hmm.
Just kind of to give you a bit of an idea of kind of how well we are able to leverage the technologies to make impact. So, for example, when I was working at Gartner, I did a lot of S&OP or planning maturity assessments, and then honestly, I think that the majority of companies have a maturity level of level 2 or below. So
Yep.
there's a lot of things to improve over there. Also, if I look at the strategic process, so the network design, Laura Cicero does this very interesting research on that, and kind of she's stating that only 10% of all companies is mature in doing kind of network design
Hmm.
proactively. And if you look at the numbers of how supply chain is improving, and this is pre-COVID, so I don't expect that this will actually be better during COVID. We actually see that only 5% of all companies are significantly improving their supply chain performance on the triangle of service, inventory, and costs.
Yeah.
So why is this relevant for now? Is because I think that we have been investing hundreds of millions in supply chain software, but we really have not been able to get the benefits out of that.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that technology is not good, but we should think about how we can leverage these technologies in a much better way in order to make impact on improving, first of all, your process maturity, like let's say, which is on the left side and the middle part of this slide, but in the end, to improve your supply chain performance. And I think that is the biggest challenge that is ahead of us.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yep, yeah, and yeah, I know Laura Cecilia from Supply Chain Insight very well, and she has created this orbit chart where she actually tracking certain specific companies like P&G, Henkel, and the likes, and you see this going all over. So basically, you want to see how they improve over time in the financial matters, in the return on capital employed, for example. And some companies are, improving, and then they made some strategic choices, and they're falling back. And basically, the better companies are steadily improving their performance, the supply chain performance. So you see this orbit chart moving up to the upper right part of the graph, and that's the 2010-2019 kind of graphs they are creating.
Yeah.
And now you see that a lot of companies are falling back, and now the world is in a turmoil, and some are having outperforming, like Daimler-Benz has marvelous financial figures, but on the margin and the P&L, but in the end it's not financially sustainable, because they are only producing the high-end models, and they're ignoring the lower end and the Series A kind of models. But in the end, that she will track down how you take a look at it if you are taking a stance from a long perspective over 10 years time, and that's quite interesting.
Yeah, but so I think once again, so for me, the key message of this slide is, we are investing in technology, and technology could be really helpful, but how do we use it in the best way?
Yeah.
And how do we kind of start to use it to actually make benefits? Because to be very honest, so most companies that I've been working with and working for is, for example, if you look at inventory, inventory turns have not improved over the last 10 years. So these figures are over 2010 to 2019. My expectation would be, based on what I see right now, is that inventory turns will even decrease, due to all the issues that we have had with COVID and all the economical issues that we have afterwards. So somewhere the question is, so how can technology help us instead of putting a lot of money in without seeing the benefit of that based on the key supply chain metrics?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And getting further into that, companies have ambitions, and to what extent do they have the ability to execute, to make it happen?
Yeah, so good question again. So I just, I like numbers, so I started to collect some numbers over time, on these kind of things. So I just put here 3 different numbers in a row, and it just gives you just an interesting perspective, Martijn. So kind of what you see is that most companies, of course, like you were mentioning, they have a very clear digital ambition. So they want to improve their digital supply chain in the next 5 years, and whether that's 85 or 90%, that does the chart is quite big.
Yeah.
If you look at, okay, what do we need, then kind of you see that only a small part of organizations has a digital roadmap beyond 3 years out, right? So we have an ambition for 5 years, and they only look 3 years ahead. And also there I see that a lot of companies that I work with, they, especially in these times where things get more exciting, so with all the supply constraints and all the demand changes, that the focus on the short term becomes again even bigger, right? So there's a bit of pressure on the planning side. And then last but not least, you can also imagine, so you can have these roadmaps, you can have these plans, but how well are you then to actually realize your plans? And I was a bit astonished by this number, but this number says that only 25% of ERP deployments become a success. So somewhere this leads for me to a couple of key questions, right? So how can we start creating better plans? How should we kind of increase our success of all the digital deployments that we are doing? And maybe the last question, maybe a bit provocative. So how much effort should we actually spend into these very complex and big ERP projects, while we should maybe spend the time and money on that in different things that could make more impact?
Yeah. It totally makes sense. When I look at this graph, especially with the on the right hand side with the ERP deployment, I see a lot of big, especially multinationals, spending millions, hundreds of millions, or billions of euros, dollars into upgrading their ERP environment, enhancing it, harmonizing it. They have say 13 ERP instances, and they want to go to one into the cloud. But in the end, what does the end customer notice about this implementation? Most likely none. So
Yeah,
the whole thing is, why should you do it? If you have your ERP instance on premise, leave it. I've been working at a bank, and even in banks, they are still using software from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. They do not touch it because 1 millisecond out of the air will make them go into bankruptcy. So basically, why bother to put all your money into going your ERP into the cloud if it doesn't make any sense business wise? But people are scared. It will not be supported. Some major German ERP vendor will not support this version anymore. Then don't bother. You can still use it. There are still Mapix and MFG Pro and you name it still working on, and you can still use it. So it doesn't surprise me, but in the end, when I talk to these kind of companies, they should think business wise. What is your strategy? What does it need? And on the middle of no digital roadmaps beyond 3 years, I talk to a lot of companies. They don't know even a roadmap, and they don't have any sequential prioritization because of that changing overnight in a sense.
exactly. Yeah, so I think, and maybe the last thing to comment on this, Martijn, so when you talk about ambition, so here it says, okay, we want to have digital supply chain in 5 years. I think some of the question also is, okay, but what is then digital supply chain, and what does it mean to you? Because what we also see is that there's a quite big disconnect between, okay, what's now my business strategy, what does it mean for my digital supply chain strategy?
A question from the audience: what is your definition of success for ERP deployments?
Yeah, that's of course always a good question, and it's I think in the end, it's all about the realization of the business case. So did you
Yes.
actually deliver what kind of the business case promised to have? So I think that's for me, it's one.
Yeah.
Secondly, kind of what I see, and maybe that's a bit more difficult to put into kind of a metric. So I see a lot of ERP implementations that even after 2 or 3 years are still causing problems. So the issues that arise from these kind of things, they kind of last very long.
Yeah.
So you can also think about, how fast can you actually kind of close a project after you have done an ERP deployment?
And basically, when I talk to companies who want to harmonize their ERP environment, you can only earn back your money in an ROI on licensing cost and maintenance, not on the business, because it doesn't improve your business at all. So, and I will get back to that later. So your ROI could only be based on service cost and license cost, and not so much business environment, because ERP into the cloud doesn't improve your business at all. And I will explain later. But maybe we can talk first about digital optimization versus transformation, so that getting in that area.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, I think kind of if you look at what we just discussed before, so kind of what is digital transformation and what is digital supply chain? And somewhere kind of for me, kind of that's a bit of a question around. So what do you want to achieve? So do you want to optimize your supply chain, or do you want to actually transform your supply chain, which I'll explain in the next slide. But just maybe to explain a bit on the differences. So what you see on the left side are some examples of what companies are doing to digitize their supply chain. So let's, for example, take the example of Amazon Go.
Yep.
Basically is kind of digitization of the shop, which in principle, of course, it's a great improvement, and it will lead to efficiency. It will lead to, of course, better customer experience, and it will lead maybe even to better productivity. But it will not lead you to kind of a new business model, I would say. So the business model stays the same, only you get more automated, so to say. And from planning perspective, so my background is in planning. Of course, you get much more data to do your planning better, and for example, to increase your availability and to improve the communication and the short-term planning with your suppliers, right? So there's a lot of value in it, so also from business case perspective, but the business case is much more driven by efficiency and maybe what the customers experience from you. And that is very different from what I would call digital transformation, because that is basically leading you to a whole new different business model. So if I would compare, for example, Amazon Go with home delivery, then home delivery is basically digitally enabled, but it's a very new business model, because through kind of the digital app that you can use to order your groceries, you will be able to connect with new customers. You will have a new value proposition. You can even, for example, start to earn money with the subscription model. So this is a very different way of looking at your business through the use of digital transformation, which of course also will have significant impact on your supply chain.
Yep.
Because once again, if I think about planning, this will lead to a whole new way of demand planning. Instead of planning in your shops, you will start to plan in your app or in your website. You will start to plan a lot of new resources. You need to plan kind of your trucks, etc. And even that will become a different value chain, or you know, a different model within your business, I would say. So a lot of different things. So there's really, it's really important to think about the difference between, okay, what do I want to achieve as a business? So do I want to optimize, or do I really want to transform by the use of using digital technology? And then think about the impact on what that means to the supply chain.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you look at this, you know, when I look at Albert Heijn and grocery delivery at home, I also look at other players in the same ecosystem like HelloFresh. So when you look at this, automatically you are looking at the whole ecosystem. What are your competitors? What are alternatives? And then you have a formal business orientation, and not so much only on an operational efficiency view.
Yeah.
And that is of interest. But you know, you have a lot of experience in supply chain planning in your business days at manufacturing company, but also with working with Gartner, having a lot of conversations with clients of Gartner about this. Can you tell me about how to view on digital supply chain planning, how it's evolving, and how companies should handle this?
Yes, of course. And kind of what I typically use is I use kind of the Gartner maturity model to kind of start thinking about that. And kind of what I found interesting is that a lot of customers that I talk to for the first time, so that typically they are somewhere between at stage 2, they start to tell me, for example, so yeah, we want to start using AI or ML in demand planning. And then I always ask the question, why? Yeah, because somewhere you need to make the connection of how mature you are and actually what you would like to do. So basically, for me, it's great to start experimenting with digital technologies, so like AI and ML, but you have to build a foundation in parallel to be able to deliver on your business results. So that's kind of, I think, the first observation.
Mm-hmm.
The second observation is also here you need to think about, okay, but what do you want to achieve with your planning transformation? So do I just want to reduce cost? So I can imagine that you want to decrease your planner cost, for example. Do I want to, for example, improve my decision quality? That could also be an objective. Or thirdly, do I want to do something that I was not able to do before? So for example, if I'm able to connect to all kind of devices through IoT, then I can start to plan things that I have not been able to do before. So for me, kind of looking at this picture, there's two key takeaways. So one is, okay, you have to start with measuring where you are today to define what are the next steps.
Mm-hmm.
And in parallel, you should kind of define you should actually start to experiment with kind of new technologies to kind of learn. But that should always be in light of what you would like to achieve in terms of, do I want to reduce costs? Do I want to become better in planning? Or do I want to do something that I have not been able to do before?
Yeah, and before the whole COVID pandemic, I saw a lot of blockchain experiments, and we all know that 80 to 90% of all these blockchain experiments failed or didn't. We're staying in a pilot phase, and then we moved on. And now we don't have the time for all these kind of experiments because there's a literal war going on, but it's a turmoil in supply chain. So now we have to be careful where we take our next steps. So yes, we should try out certain things, new startup pilots, but it has to be in line of our strategic roadmap. So that's absolutely what I'm taking out of this. Um,
Exactly.
and if you translate it to the skills, because you talking especially about in supply chain planning, what do you think of what's happening on technology, and what is needed in business kind of skills for planners?
Yeah, so also that's it's actually a very important one. And so kind of what you see, of course, is that with new technology coming in, so even for APS systems, all kind of new technologies, there will become kind of new roles in the organization. So you will have data scientists, you will have data engineers, etc., who will be taking over part of the work that a typical planner would have been doing before. So typical planner, kind of in the, I would say, between brackets, old days, was a very analytical person who would be able who was very good at data crunching in Excel,
Hmm.
presenting results. I think that the role of a planner is really evolving into a role um, that should be able to understand the technologies, but not should be the expert himself, but should be able to understand what is happening in the business and translate into requirements for the data scientists and the data engineers. So that's a very changing role where, for example, data visualization becomes much more important than kind of doing the data crunching itself. And of course, also that leads to different behaviors that these planners need to have to be able to connect the dots between the business and also the technical side of things. So I think a really big change from being a more analytical, data-driven person to someone who can kind of is I would say the oil or the glue between the different parts of the organization.
Yeah, I hope and I expect that the supply chain professionals of the future will be able to talk more in business terms and strategic terms with the help of some tools. So I know a supply chain VP quite well who is an expert in Power BI, creating interfaces. Making underlying data available to all your commercial colleagues, to your procurement colleagues, finance, etc., etc., etc. So in the end, I hope and expect that the supply chain planner, professional, manager, director will be more talking about business, strategic sense, and how it relates to getting results done, to get the strategic ambitions in place and realized, than just like 10 years ago talking about operations and costs and Excel, that kind of stuff. So that's my
Yeah,
take on this.
yeah, and hopefully that will also help then to kind of move to a higher maturity level because I think
Yep.
my perception is that we are a bit stuck, let's say, in the evolvement of maturity specifically for planning. So somewhere when I was moving to Ghana, I always had the hope that I would see a lot of companies who would be beyond level 2 or level 3. Uh, but to be honest, I don't. I talked to roughly 300 companies at Gartner, but I did not see a lot of companies who are beyond that. So hopefully, technology can also enable us to actually make that leap between being stuck somewhere at level 2 or between level 2 and level 3, and go actually to that level 3, level 4 maturity level.
I see exactly the same, and I am also having a lot of research done about this matter, and I see it same being stuck at level 3, where you have your sales and operations planning. A lot of companies talk about I integrated business planning, but when you're looking under the hood, it is not IBP because the CFO has their own um, systems to steer upon, and it is not financially lead with the margins in supply chain and cost to serve and that kind of stuff. So I think that a lot of IBP implementations are not IBP; they are still SNOP in my sense. I see a lot of comments and questions and remarks in the chat. That's fine. I'm tracking it down, and yeah, I see some interesting questions. I will get back to you at the Q&A or earlier on. But first, I want to tell you something about my supply chain view on business strategy. So, wait up. I have to. Yes. Here it is. So basically, now I have a short 3 slides about business strategy. So basically, what you first have to bear in mind, what is the customer needs, what is the buying behavior, both in B2B and B2C. That's in the middle. So that's a starting point. And when you move on, you have 3 directions to go. Either you go north, that's product leadership, that's the Apple orientation, or you go to operational excellence, that's Southwest, that's like Walmart or Action or Amazon in that matter, or you go to the red arrow custom intimacy, that is the Southeast. That's like Cisco. So basically, you have different kind of directions, and you cannot be all at once. You cannot be Apple, Walmart, and Cisco in once. You will be stretched, so that's not an option. It does mean if you have a product leadership going north, like being Apple, you have to have a minimum threshold for the other two directions. So you have to be aware and have some minimum operational excellence and a minimum customer intimacy. But look at Apple, you don't can order all kind of iPhones. You have a limited choice. And also on operational excellence, yes, they have kind of an efficiency, but it's not the cheapest one, and that's Apple. So basically, you have to choose. That's basically it. This is Tracy Wiersma, this common knowledge in business strategy, and that's around for 20 years. So basically, companies can only be successful in one direction as a company. If you're very successful, you can maybe add some of the other two, but three is impossible. That's scientific knowledge. You can't argue with it. And next, I put 6 supply chain types to it. So and it's I related. On the left you have the make to stock, and on the right you have make to order, and engineer to order, and configure to order. Basically, that's the split left and right. But you also can recognize these supply chains on the dominance. Some supply chains are marketing dominant, the purple ones on the left, or the ones are dominant by R&D, purple one on the right, and so on. And you see some brands who are related into areas, so they have connected successfully the business strategy, operational excellence, customer intimacy, or product leadership to supply chain types. And but for PepsiCo, they are a product leader. For some categories, they are end of life cycle. They move the supply chains to the orange one, and they will be more operational excellence oriented. So you have supply chain types, and some companies have supply chain types all over. But do know what is your strategic direction, what kind of supply chains belong to it, and some of the times it's basically per division or category, especially when you're a larger organization. So that's the key point of this. But why telling you all this in light of digital transformation is when you have different strategies and supply chains, it also means different organizational structures. So on the operational excellence, you have centralization on the left-hand side. So a lot of centralized procurement, for example. Whereas on the right-hand side, customer intimacy also means decentralization. Procurement people have more ability to buy on their own. That's on the right-hand side. That's customer intimacy. That's a consequence. But basically, when you have different organizational structures, also means you have different processes. And you have also different systems. So one supply chain doesn't fit all. We all know that as supply chain professional people. So that also means one supply chain system doesn't work for all. So you have different kind of systems. So you cannot. That's totally impossible. Put 6 supply chain types like this, like these 6 circles, in one ERP system. That's totally impossible. You can't manage it, and people don't understand it. So you can't put up these 6 supply chain types in one ERP system. Totally unmanageable. And in the end, different kind of systems, but also different kind of KPIs. And that's where I see that most companies are failing, moving from 4 to 5 level. That even the more mature companies are still struggling with KPIs, basically because they have KPIs, the same KPIs for different supply chain types, and that's where it go wrong. Your take on this, Peter?
Yeah, so kind of I recognize what you're saying. So what I always find interesting is that when I talk to a lot of companies and I look at their strategy, then typically somewhere on the bottom right, somewhere there's supply chain strategy mentioned, and it says always resilient supply chain. And there's very limited connection between actually what you want to achieve as a business. And I think kind of that's also what is stated in this one. And I think kind of what I see on top of that is that, I think this kind of is a very good generic framework, but what I see more and more is that companies have different supply chains within one organization. So sometimes they have a make to stock for a specific customer segment, and they have a make to order for another segment, which really requires different ways of working and different also technology to help them to manage those flows, I would say.
Yeah.
So I kind of totally concur on your message saying that there is no one-size-fits-all system for all of those different typologies that you put on the slide.
No. And moving on, this is a survey we have done 2 years ago. After the first wave of COVID, we asked 106 manufacturing companies in Europe where they have their investment plans in supply chain software. Basically, what you see here is the blue bars are overall respondents, the 106, and the orange one are the more mature supply chains software supply chain companies. So that's according to themselves. But what's kind of interesting to see is, okay, S&OP is still hot among the majority of the manufacturing companies, and also end-to-end supply chain visibility. But when going down, you see some differences. So the more mature companies are more looking into prescriptive analytics, also supply chain network design. Let's call it a digital twin on the supply chain level. It's quite hot, and also real-time transport visibility is hot among the more mature companies, and also supply chain risk management, especially there. Then we talk about resilience. You see difference here. My point is, you see already differences among the maturity of the companies where to invest money, and it's not on this slide. The level 1 and level 2 companies are still struggling with ERP and WMS. That's basically what's underneath, like this. Comments on your side, Peter?
No, I think I recognize what you're saying. So is that kind of low maturity companies will spend their time on and their money on different things.
Mm-hmm.
What I think is always striking is that if I look at these kind of charts, S&OP is almost always on top. So then you should wonder what has changed over time. And I saw also one of the comments, let's say in the chat box, saying that, how well are we doing on APS deployments?
Mm-hmm.
So I think kind of the same thing is probably the same also for kind of ERP deployments. So kind of what I see, for example, for S&OP and APS deployments is that they take very long and are also very complex. So that might also clarify why this one is still always quite high on the agenda of many organizations.
Yeah, I totally agree. Maybe the more mature companies have already worked out their S&OP processes and the supporting IT systems, and can move on to prescriptive analytics and IBP. That's my take. Moving on, because we also want to talk about IT super map and how to make it work on with the right supply chain software. So this is my take on the left hand side. I see my illustration of what Gartner has introduced. I already think 10 years ago, about the base layered application strategy. Basically, when you start at the bottom, that's a system of record. That's your ERP system and your legacy system. My take is don't touch it. Don't do a lot of investment to harmonize or whatever. Then in the middle, you have your system of differentiation. You see your APS environment, WMS, and that kind of stuff. And then on the high end and the top layer, you see the system of innovation. There you see your startups and your apps and that kind of stuff. So that's what Gartner already addressed 10 years ago, and I think that's still valid. My take is that you should divide your energy, time, and money in a right way to these kind of levels. What's your take, Peter?
Yeah, so I think I like the picture. So I think it gives a bit more flavor to kind of a bit of a theoretical model, to be honest. So on the different architecture level. And I think this also highlights kind of the thing that we also discussed when we were talking about kind of the maturity model for planning, is that you should work on these different levels in parallel, and not only work, for example, on innovation, kind of spend your time over different levels involved, kind of in a balanced way, I would say. Yeah. And maybe I also looked at the comments. I saw people were saying, well, shouldn't we then not invest in ERP? Of course, to some extent you should invest, but I think the point somewhere is that if you only work on one level, this will not give you kind of the overall benefit. So you should balance your time and you balance your efforts over the different levels to kind of mature your supply chain performance.
If you look at it layer, my advice would be, what will the end customer notice or the patient notice through all your efforts? So if the impact of your efforts will be on the high end, on the system of innovation, or probably system of differentiation, I think you should put the effort over there, your time and money and energy. and not so much on a system of record. But you need your system of record, of course. You have to pay your bills and you have to earn money. But in the end, in my opinion, most companies should put most efforts on a system of differentiation, and to a lesser extent on system of record and innovation. Yes, so that may be, say, 60% on system of differentiation, and say 20% on system of record, or 25, and 50% of innovation, in a matter of money, and not the 100 millions just going to ERP. That's nonsense, in my opinion. And I have also created a new view on all these layers, because I see a lot of questions about APS and planning, whatever. So we created this visualization of the convergence planning tower. And you start at the entrance, where your sales orders coming in, and you will administer these orders in your ERP environment. And then you go to the next level, the second floor. You have your sales and operations execution layer, where you have your WMS, TMS, and your purchase orders. And then on top of that, you have your sales and operations planning. That's basically supply and demand volume matching. Going on the IBP floor, you have your long-term financial gap closing decisions. So you translate your volumes into financials, euros and dollars, and then you make your decisions on the longer term. That's called IBP. So you have your financial, and you have your margins, and you have your financial gap and your budget and how to close it. And on the top floor, you have, on the right hand side, your market demand, and that's where Laura Cecilia is coming in. You have to be more aware on your market side, so not only forecasting, but totally your market, what is happening in your ecosystem, how it's changing outside in. Then you E2E, end-to-end planning, and that's where you see the digital twin on the supply chain level, on the ecosystem or value chain level, and you have your market supply environment, and that's where it's converging. And it's converging on the cross section of the vertical bar and the horizontal bar. So that's where it's converging. There is where your board will take decisions on supply chain matters. So that's my take. What is your view on this visual, Peter?
Yeah, so I think this is a helpful picture to kind of visualize where you could and should invest in. So I think that's very helpful. And kind of what I see is that a lot of companies still are struggling with a good setup of S&OE. So they have some form of S&OP, but they really need to mature S&OE, which is specifically relevant in these times. With I saw also that visibility is one of the challenges. And on top of that, a lot of companies are saying that they want to become, let's say, to the level of IBP, or they want to go there, but it's still very difficult to get there. So I think S&OE and kind of moving towards IBP are a bit of the main challenges that a lot of companies are struggling with at the moment.
Yeah. Yes, and we can talk about it. I see still a lot of chats and comments coming in, and we'll get to that hopefully at the end. So basically, now we get into the environment. Okay, we have seen these layers, this convergent planning tower with your S&OP and S&OE and all the systems. This is basically the 2022 version of the IT subway map. So basically, what you see here, and you can download it. It's you have all kind of lines, subway lines. The black one, that's the ERP line. The red one is the WMS, and so forth, so on. So basically, I created this already 11 years ago, this kind of version. This is based on the input of the vendors themselves. But basically, you only get a subway station when you have enough implementations compared to your size and your revenue, etc. So it's not, yeah, we have it in our portfolio, never implemented. You won't get a subway station when you have it in your portfolio as a vendor, but never implemented in Europe. So basically, this is proven track record. What companies like mentioned here, there are a lot of them. I think almost 100 on it. What they have done and where they have proven their existence and their expertise. So that's the thing. So you have all kind of things. And if we go into it, since I think 2 years ago, we also created a subsection of the green visibility line, and that's focused on real-time transport visibility. And in my opinion, what you are mentioning, Peter, is this is a proven fact that the sales and operation execution is very important, and that's why they are implementing a lot of these kind of tools. Peter?
Yeah, exactly. So I recognize that, and I think also one of the comments was is that there will be a need for visibilities, which I fully recognize.
Yep.
Kind of the so I like this. The thing that I still find challenging, and I think that's also kind of a bit of a challenge for technology, is how can you kind of include kind of the insights from these kind of tools into your planning processes. So I think that there is still a level of disconnection between, for example, what transport planning is doing versus what's happening in manufacturing and the supply base, for example. So I think that is something which I would expect that would mature more in technology over the coming years.
Yes, I totally agree. And if you look at like forecasting, you see also kind of newcomers, and these are the newcomers from last year. Blue Ridge is kind of a new flavor coming over from the US and starting out in Scandinavia. Very successful in pricing optimization. How do pricing influence demand and supply? That's my part. Your take on others here?
Yeah, so I think Jarvis is a very interesting one because, of course, they are really focusing on demand planning, and they really are kind of claiming that they can do the implementations much quicker. So I think that's also an interesting one. Flow team much more focusing on really kind of experimenting with resilient planning, and Relax really focusing on replenishment planning in retail.
Yeah.
Demand soft, to be honest, I don't know that well. I think what is interesting overall is that all of these startups is that they kind of are challenging a bit of the status quo from different perspective. And I think that's also important, also maybe relevant for bigger companies to experiment with as well.
Yeah, yeah. No, yeah, Relax and Blue is rather a scale up, rather large. But Jarvis, they claim to implement forecasting in one day, sometimes even within an hour. So that's the new way. And Flowlity is doing forecasting three subsequent chains of companies in one supply chain. So they can, as a forecast in a SaaS model, that you actually not only forecast and share also your forecast among parties upstream and downstream. So that's kind of new way of thinking, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Um, and a totally new way of thinking about supply chain functionality is sustainability reporting. That's a new line for this year on our IT subway map. And you see a lot of, especially scale-ups right now, Big Mile, Zero Outs, Trax, Pledge, and Trust Trace, and Jagger is already more established. But sustainability reporting has a lot of flavors and is paramount and is needed. As of 2023, publicly traded companies in the EU should mention their progress on sustainability reporting to the accountants. And basically, if you don't measure stuff, you cannot show your improvement. So basically, this is why this kind of software has to be implemented. But, I want to talk about. We have a few. We have 3 slides to go, and we have some time for Q&A. But my take is, I created this slide. Why? Because a lot of companies, when they do RFPs, when they go out to look for a software vendor, basically they mainly focus on functionality, upper left quadrant. RFPs, functionality, bits and bytes and functionality, that kind of stuff. So, and to some extent, they look at technology. That's the blue one. Is it, in the cloud, etc. In what language it has been written, that kind of stuff. But these are the main two focuses on RFPs. And that's also, a bit translated into the Magic Quadrant of Gartner, whereas in Gartner also talk about delivery. That's the orange red one. But there, there are some holes in the sense of what is the geographic coverage of the vendor, what are the number of projects per region, and what are the implementation partners, how well are the positions, etc. But the major lacking part, in my opinion, with the RFPs from companies looking for software is the green one, knowledge. So what is the heritage of the vendor? So if a software vendor has a heritage in semi-process and in the beer industry, and what are they doing? Do they have connection with universities, etc.? So the green part, the expertise, the domain expertise of the companies of the manufacturing, retail, or wholesale company that's lacking most of the times in the RFPs by companies. Most of the time, I see a lot of RFPs like copy paste of others, and these RFPs getting longer and longer and totally useless. So basically, this is a format, I would say, when you let the vendor fill out this format, you get 4 dots on 4 matrices, and maybe you find the knowledge part way more interesting than the functionality part or the technology part. So this is what you should discuss internally. What is the focus when you are looking for a vendor? Um, Peter, what's your take?
Yeah, so I like this a lot. So maybe two comments on this. So I think from a user or buyer perspective, I think it becomes more and more difficult to kind of distinguish between the different software vendors, specifically when talking about planning. So that's my so it seems that they are converging a bit, at least from the outside, on kind of what they're offering.
Mm-hmm.
So to your point, it becomes much more important to actually understand on why they are different or where they are focusing on more from kind of the knowledge perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other side, I think kind of from buyer perspective, they should be, and that's what we discussed before in the during the webinars. They should be, the buyer should become much more clear on actually what they want to buy and why they want to buy it, basically, and then the link to the strategy, I would say. So I think there is I would say, kind of um, uh, an improvement at both sides of the table. So that on the supplier side, becoming much more visible on what you can offer, not much on the functionality side, but on the knowledge side, and from the buyer side to become much more clear on why and what you would like to buy from your software vendor.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I totally agree. To wrap up on my side, basically when you're looking out for software vendors, my advice is, if you are looking for a supply chain software on premise, you see 4 cars. Basically, you have to do test drives. So my advice is no PowerPoint presentations, only live demos of your industry. So ask for a live demo of your industry. So don't bother to have your time spent on PowerPoint stuff. Basically, when you're buying a car, you don't buy on specs. You go to the dealer and you ask for a test drive. And these are all good cars. One of them is mine. You probably never guess which one. But you have to have references of live customers, and you want to have a technology a roadmap overview. That's basically my 4 points of this. So these are on-premise cars, I would say. So combustion engines, but you also have the more advanced cars, and you have already 4 uh, interesting new cars. And basically, um, you want to know which one does suit you to what extent. So the upper right one, the Lightyear, that's the contestant of Tesla, maybe. But and then you have, this is in the cloud, so you have, and the question would be, are you ready for all this, for this kind of software? And you have in the cloud, you can do a lot of machine learning and AI because it's all in the cloud, and you use the exchange of external data, etc. So basically, that's the key part. And these could also be startups. So Lightyear is definitely a startup. Are you ready for that? To what extent do you want to spend money in it? So that's one thing. And in the end, and that's my to end up my part. You have to match your maturity with your supply chain software. But you see a lot of people buying a Lamborghini, especially when you have a purple one and don't know how to drive. You will stick to a pole in just 1 kilometer or so. So that's with the very advanced software. I see. Are you ready for all this? What's your take on this?
Yeah, it's a good picture. Not a good picture, but it's at least a funny picture. But it's pretty much in line with kind of what we discussed previously during the call. So I think, we talked about success rate, etc. So I think success rate for a large part has to do with kind of the ability and the maturity to drive it, I would say. So I fully concur on kind of what you're mentioning here.
So basically, I see that we are already on the hour almost. So, Peter and I will be available the next 30 minutes in the lounge. So please join us if you want to discuss. I see a lot of discussion going on, much too long to discuss right here because we have only 30 seconds to go. That's a pity, but we stick to the hour. So please join us in the lounge will be sitting at table 1, and I see a lot of questions. I can go on an hour, and Peter and I too probably, but we will stick to the hour. So please join us at the lounge. Here are my credentials and Peter's. So if you want more information, so go to our IT Super Map, or go to Peter with his Breakthrough Advisory website. There's more with some useful insight. And basically, I would like to thank the audience for joining us with a lot of conversation. I like the conversations. We have still a lot to answer probably, and I have to do it offline or in the lounge. So maybe I see you in the next webinar Wednesday. That will be, I think, in 2 weeks' time. If not, thank you, Peter, for now.
Yes, of course. It was nice to do this, Martijn. Nice to talk to you.
Yes, same here, and we'll join later in the lounge. So if I see you later in the lounge, and thank you for attending this webinar, and maybe I see you in the lounge right after this, or maybe I see you in another webinar. Thank you for now, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.